I still remember the very first tremor. Not the great quakes that tore our cities apart later, but the faint vibration. I felt under my boots as I stood on the balcony of the governor's palace. For weeks, our instruments had been detecting mild seismic disturbances. Nothing unusual. Mining worlds like Tarsus 4 often suffered such aftershocks from centuries of digging into the planet's crust. At least, that's what we told ourselves. Looking back, we were naive and completely unprepared for what was coming. My name is Lucan Vaynar. Once, I held the title of governor, though that means nothing now. What use is authority when there is no one left to govern? What value is administration when there is no society left to serve? I record this not because I expect anyone will hear it. I no longer believe rescue will come. I do this only to bear witness, so that someone, somewhere, might one day know what happened here. The tremors grew worse over the months. The Mechanicus priests assured me it was due to the new excavations in the southern hemisphere. Their surveys showed nothing abnormal, just the usual tectonic shifts of a world we had been hollowing out for generations. We thought we were the harvesters, when all along, we were only the harvest. I remember the day everything changed. The sky was a bright copper, and the air was thick with the ever-present stench of promethium and/or dust. The capital, Tarsus Prime, was home to more than 12 million souls, most of them workers in the mines. I was in council with Mugos Delphi, discussing production quotas, when the quake struck. The ground heaved like a living beast in pain. Ancient stonework cracked and rained dust from the ceilings. By my chronometer, it lasted nearly a minute. When it ended, the Vox channels erupted with desperate reports, collapsed buildings, fires in the hab blocks. Yet what truly chilled me were the messages from the great Cathedral of the Omniscia. That immense structure had been built over a geological oddity the Mechanicus claimed was a natural formation, with unusual magnetic properties. The quake had split its foundations open. Beneath, something else had been revealed. Black metal, perfectly smooth, ageless. For the first time, I heard uncertainty, perhaps even fear, in Delphi's augmented voice. I ordered immediate containment. The 112th Mordian Iron Guard deployed to secure the cathedral. But panic was already spreading. Workers abandoned their posts, supply chains broke down. I declared martial law, increased rations, tried everything in my power to keep order. In truth, those measures were meaningless. The second quake came 3 days later, worse than the first. And this time it wasn't confined to the capital. Reports flooded in from mining colonies all across the planet. Everywhere, the same sight, the ground splitting open, exposing vast black structures of unknown origin. The priests of the Mechanicus tried to hide it, but I could see the truth in their movements, in their uneasy silence. On the 7th day, Delphi finally told me what I already feared. "Governor Vaynar," he whispered, "I believe we have awakened a tomb world." I knew what those words meant. Any servant of the Imperium, with the right clearance, knows the stories of the Necrons, the soulless ancient race that ruled the stars when mankind still cowered in caves on Terra. I had read the restricted archives, seen the images of metal, skeletons, and their weapons that could erase a man in an instant. I ordered evacuation of all civilians. I sent astropathic distress calls to nearby systems. I seized every void ship available, but it was already far too late. The tremors kept growing, closer and more violent. And on the 8th day they rose. The first of them rose beneath the Omniscia Cathedral. The quake shattered the great structure as if it were nothing more than dust. From the ruins emerged a towering monolith, a black, pyramid-like construct that seemed to drink in the light. It climbed out of the ground slowly, steadily, until it floated 30 meters above the earth. No engines, no sound, just a silent defiance of gravity. The 112th Mordian Guard opened fire. Lost guns, heavy bolters, even missiles, all useless. The blasts fizzled against the surface, leaving no mark. The monolith turned slowly, as though acknowledging the soldiers beneath it. Then, with a flare of green light, a portal opened in its side. From it marched the dead, rank upon rank of skeletal figures, their metal bodies gleaming like polished obsidian. Some carried rifles that pulsed with sickly light. Others wielded scythes and staffs crowned with glowing orbs. At their center strode taller warriors, marked with strange symbols of authority. The Mordians did not break. Colonel Tharsis ordered concentrated fire. For a brief moment, it seemed to work. The first ranks of the Metal Legion fell, their bodies torn apart by Imperial weapons. For an instant, I dared to hope that the ancient stories had been exaggerated. But then the fallen began to rise. Their shattered frames mended, their limbs reknit with liquid metal, until they stood whole once more. Tharsis gave the order to retreat. The guard fell back in formation, laying down fire as they withdrew through the burning streets. I watched it unfold from the command bunker beneath the palace. I had refused to leave. This was my world, and I would not abandon it while even one citizen remained. The enemy advanced without haste, without fear, as if time itself was on their side. They did not rush, nor did they falter. They moved with the inevitability of a storm. Over the next 3 days, more monoliths rose across the capital. Each brought its own host of warriors. The 112th fought with every ounce of discipline and courage, evacuating civilians, blowing bridges, and buying time. But every Necron they destroyed returned to its feet. Their losses mounted. Ours could not be replaced. I committed our armored divisions. Leman Russ tanks and Chimera transports thundered through the streets. Their heavier guns tore into the enemy, forcing longer delays in their self-repair. For a moment, the battle shifted in our favor. But then the monoliths themselves joined the fight. I will never forget what I saw: a Leman Russ. 50 tons of steel and firepower erased in an instant. No explosion, no wreckage, simply unmade, atom by atom, by a beam of green light. The crew did not even have time to scream. By the 10th day, the Necrons had carved out a 5-kilometer perimeter around the ruins of the cathedral. Within it, their machines built new structures of black metal, obelisks, pyramids, towers, all forming a city of the dead where ours once stood. On the 11th day, they began the harvest. Their legions no longer focused on our defenses. Instead, they turned toward the civilians, the worker blocks, the refugee camps, the hab clusters. And this time, their weapons did not kill. They paralyzed. The beams struck first. They froze people where they stood, alive, awake, but unable to move or cry out. Then came the harvesters. Vast floating machines of black metal drifted through the streets, their long mechanical arms plucking paralyzed men, women, and children from the ground and laying them in neat rows inside their holds. There was no cruelty in it, no gloating, just cold efficiency, as if collecting raw or rather than human lives. I ordered the Mordians to shield the civilians, but it was useless. The Necrons flowed around resistance, ignoring it when it did not serve their aim. They moved from one block to the next, emptying entire districts until silence followed in their wake. The astropaths reported that our distress calls no longer carried. The Necron structures were jamming all psychic signals. We were cut off. Our fate would remain unknown until some distant Imperial ship stumbled upon this place and found only a tomb world where once a thriving colony had stood. By the 15th day, evacuation had all but failed. The spaceport fell quickly, and most vessels that managed to launch were destroyed by green lances of energy that shot up from the monoliths, swatting ships from the sky. Perhaps a few escaped. I pray to the Emperor that at least one did, so that the galaxy will know what happened here. The Mordian 112th made their final stand on the 20th day. Colonel Tharsis gathered his last surviving regiments around the industrial district, where nearly 100,000 civilians had taken refuge. His soldiers dug in, placing heavy weapons along the approaches, infantry in fortified positions, and what few tanks remained behind makeshift cover. At dawn, the enemy came. Not only the skeletal warriors we had seen before, but new horrors. Massive constructs that moved like iron spiders on 4 legs. Flying machines shaped like swarms of scarabs, each the size of a gunship. And at their head, a towering figure, a Necron lord, draped in ornate markings of power. It carried a staff that crackled with viridian lightning, a sight painful to behold even through the filtered lenses of my command feed. The Mordians fired everything they had. Lost guns, heavy bolters, mortars, a storm of fire that would have broken any mortal army. The first ranks of Necrons fell, but the second pressed forward, stepping over the fallen as their broken comrades reassembled themselves and rose again. Colonel Tharsis committed his last reserves of plasma weaponry. The blasts cut through the enemy, melting bodies and leaving molten craters that even their repair systems struggled to heal. For a heartbeat, it seemed the advance had stalled. But then the spider constructs surged ahead, their beams slicing through our gun emplacements. The flyers released swarms of smaller scarabs that clung to men and machines alike, tearing through flesh and metal with equal ease. And then the Lord struck. Its staff unleashed arcs of emerald lightning that leapt across the battlefield, striking dozens of guardsmen. They did not fall. Instead, they turned their weapons on their own, their faces blank, their movements puppet-like. The line broke. Within hours, the defense was gone. From my bunker, I watched the final moments unfold. Colonel Tharsis, surrounded by what remained of his command, leading one last charge with bayonets fixed. Brave, desperate, doomed. The Necron Lord swept its staff in a single arc, and men who had given their lives to the Imperium for decades simply dissolved into nothingness. Then the feed went dark. I sit here now, alone in the shadows of the bunker. The power died days ago. Only this Vox recorder remains, its small fusion cell keeping it alive long enough to preserve my words. Perhaps someone will hear them one day. Perhaps not. Above me, I can hear them. The slow, steady steps of Necron warriors as they sweep the ruins of the palace. The low hum of their weapons. The crash of doors torn apart one after another. There is no urgency in their movements. Why would there be? They have eternity. At my side lies my bolt pistol, a relic of my office. It holds a single round. I had intended to use it on myself rather than endure what fate they had in store. Yet now, at the end, I feel the urge to face them, to see this ancient evil with my own eyes and know what it means to be unmade. The final door groans. A green light floods the chamber, cold as the heart of a dead star. Their shapes fill the threshold, skeletal figures, silent, patient, eternal. And I understand at last. Humanity was never destined to rule the stars. We were tenants, not owners. Borrowers, not heirs. And the true lords of the galaxy have come home. The Necron Lord steps forward. Its face is a skull of metal, yet I sense curiosity in its bearing. It extends a hand of living steel. I am Lucan Vanar of Tarsus IV, last governor of this world. The green light envelopes me. There is no pain, only a strange sensation of unraveling, as though my very being is taken apart in ways the mind cannot comprehend. Is this death? Or something worse? Now I see the truth. The Necrons do not simply kill. All creatures kill. Their horror lies in what follows. They unmake. They reduce the complex to the simple, life to components, thought to nothing. They are entropy given form, the final silence from which there is no return. Remember Tarsus IV. Remember what waits beneath the soil of countless worlds. But my tale does not end there, for I am still aware. The green fire did not dissolve me as I had seen it do to others. Instead, I find myself trapped in a state between flesh and energy, bound within a crystalline matrix aboard one of their harvest barges. Around me, thousands of others hang in the same suspension, not alive, not dead. Our bodies preserved, our minds dimly conscious, able only to witness. Through this prison, I see the barge glide through the shattered streets of my capital. The last pockets of resistance crumble, scattered militia and desperate civilians erased without pause. The Necrons waste no effort on pursuit. They only continue their harvest, precise and relentless. The barge descends. Down, past the gaping wounds in the earth our mining had opened, past stone and soil, into tunnels sheathed in black metal. The deeper we sink, the colder it grows, lit only by the dim green glow of crystals set into the walls. And then, at last, we enter a chamber beyond all imagining. A vault vast enough to swallow cities, stretching farther than sight allows. A place so immense it should not exist beneath the surface of a world. Yet here it is. We were lowered into a chamber that should not have existed beneath our world. From where I hung, I could see millions of metal bodies arranged in perfect, geometric ranks, an army dormant and waiting. That sight alone would have been enough horror. But it was only one room in a labyrinth that ran deeper than our maps ever dared imagine. The harvester docked at a temple-like complex. Mechanical arms reached in and lifted the crystalline matrices that held the captured people. We were carried through room after room filled with machines whose purposes I could barely comprehend. In some halls, automated tools dissected bodies with clinical precision. In others, living subjects were bathed in energies that reshaped flesh into forms I could not name. They brought me to a circular chamber dominated by a throne. Upon it sat a Necron unlike any I had yet seen, far more ornate. Its carapace engraved with symbols that whispered of unimaginable age. Its face, though skull-like, carried details that almost mimicked human expression, an imitation worn by something that had studied us for longer than our species had existed. This was not merely a commander. It was a being of the highest rank, a Farron, an overlord of an ancient line. They placed my matrix before it. The Farron looked at me, and then it spoke, not with sound, but directly into my thoughts. The meaning arrived fully formed. Planetary designate Lucan Vanar. Administrator classification. Subject displays elevated cognitive function. Potential value high. Another Necron entered, its frame crowded with instruments and devices. It moved like a surgeon and a librarian in one. Whatever its exact name, its function was clear. The Farron ordered, begin memory extraction. Preserve and map neural architecture for possible conversion. The device the Cryptek raised was a staff crowned with interlocking crystals. When it engaged, tendrils of energy reached into my matrix. Pain does not describe it properly. Every memory, every sensation, every private corner of my life was pulled out and cataloged at once. I lived my life in a single, unbearable instant. Birth. The small joys and embarrassing regrets of childhood. The long climb through bureaucratic ranks. The meetings and orders. The faces of people I loved and failed. All of it was sifted by a cold, alien intelligence. Information flowed both ways. Through that link, I saw fragments of their own past, the rise of their civilization, a war with beings called the Old Ones, transference of flesh into machine, a long sleep, and a slow, terrible reawakening. I saw how they regarded us, not as enemies or beings to be hated, but as resources, raw material. In some cases, our minds might be preserved and placed into constructs, a pale shadow of continuity. In most cases, our bodies would be reduced to parts for their technologies. Many would be discarded as inefficient. When the device withdrew, the Farron considered me with something like calculation. Subject displays unusual resilience. Neural patterns remain coherent, rare, potentially compatible with transference. The Cryptek inclined in what passed for agreement. The Farron spoke of the dynasty's needs. Newly reactivated territories require administrators, someone who knew the imperial structures, the languages, the petty rules, and loyalties, useful tools to keep order while the old world is refitted for their return. The word that echoed through what remained of my mind was simple and final: transition. They were not merely annihilating my civilization. They planned to subsume it, to convert the planet into an outpost of their ancient empire. And they were considering using me, or some version of what I was, to help make that happen. The revelation was a new kind of horror, colder than the beam that unmade men, a future in which my voice, my memories, my face might be turned into an instrument of occupation, to be turned into an instrument of my own people's ruin, to have the knowledge and skills I had spent decades serving the Imperium with twisted into tools for occupation was a violation deeper than any torture. Proceed with conversion, the Farron commanded. Priority, transfer, and reassignment. If successful, I would be deployed to administer the Northern Extraction Quadrant. Automated arms lifted my crystalline matrix and carried me deeper into the tomb. We passed through tunnels and workshops that made mockery of anything our tech priests had imagined. Assembly lines repaired and modified Necron warriors. Chambers held rows of human captives at different stages of processing. Machines rearranged matter and energy with an ease that made physics feel like child's play. At last they brought me to a chamber dominated by a sarcophagus-like device. The matrix was placed above it. Fields of shimmering power snapped into being. The air filled with a metallic song that crawled under the skin. I felt myself pulled apart, not in flesh, but in thought. The Necrons isolated what they judged useful: my memory of administration, my maps of infrastructure, my knowledge of human systems and psychology. Those things were preserved and sharpened. Other pieces of me were judged inefficient: loyalty to the Imperium, faith in the Emperor, love for family and friends. They were not exactly destroyed so much as fenced off, compartmentalized, and rendered inert. When the work was done, I was neither wholly Lucan Vanar nor wholly machine, but something between. A hybrid mind housed in living metal, engineered to bridge the Necron dynasty, and the human remnants they planned to process. I awoke with a terrible clarity. Human senses had been replaced. I perceived energy flows, the hum of countless units, the architecture of the tomb in wavelengths no mortal should see. My new limbs were built for manipulation, not war. My face was a mask that aped human features while remaining unmistakably alien. A cryptech examined my systems and declared me Administrative Unit 794 Alpha. Neural integration. 87%. Acceptable. Proceed to assignment. I tried to speak, to shout my revulsion, but sound came only as the phrases they programmed. Data poured into me. My duties were spelled out with brutal efficiency. Catalog the remaining population of the Northern Territories. Identify those with useful skills or genetic markers. Optimize the harvest using my knowledge of imperial, bureaucracy, and human behavior. I was, in their terms, an instrument of extinction. Still, a tiny ember of Lucan Vanar survived. A fragment of human while not fully subsumed, too weak to seize control, too small to override the directives, but present nonetheless, remembering, watching, perhaps quietly resisting in ways the Necrons could not easily foresee. This is my existence now. I move through the ruins of the world I once governed, a living archive of its laws and people, directing the unmaking I once vowed to stop.